Oh, we don't.
We haven't. Yeah, so I work for this.
Anyways.
Fun about what you said. I was even, I know, he was so good at this. I know. Yeah, I think it's
So many choices, right?
biologists, shellfish.
People close to me.
Right now I have two directs, about 20.
Outfit for you. You go ahead and start one. Start.
Do you have the public comment sheet? Public comment sheet? I'm like,
Right. I think better format.
that's what they call it.
Yes, okay. We'll just do it that way, just to keep it the same.
Yeah.
Make sure the lights are all cut.
I guess we're talking to the microphones.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir. All right. So, wasn't it? Well, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm a commercial trainer. Great. Do, that. I'm not.
This.
I got that. Yes. Call them twin names, and I'm gonna tell you. About. What do you think about?
That's already.
Well, honestly, rather just, no, have the thing, but I get tired.
Ready for me to get started here? All right. Can y'all hear me out here? How's the sound here? Everybody hear me just fine? Up a little? We're going to get started here. We're waiting for, to see if we could get another advisor or two to come online, but I don't know that we have. Okay. How about the sound now? You good? Everybody good? All right. So I want to thank y'all for being here, right? First off, we're here tonight for the March 20th, North Carolina Marine Fisheries Commission Shellfish Crustacean Advisory Committee. First I want to start with, we do not have a quorum tonight. We do now. Okay. we had we were waiting for one more advisor. We were at 5. We're now at 6, so scratch that. I'm gonna call this meeting to order. I'd like to do a roll call just to, solidify the quorum. Jesse, you got that?
Certainly can do that. Birch. Hammond. Artisan. Marshall.
Here.
Morris. Mustin. Shepherd. Willis. Wilson. Service. And Chairman Blanton.
Here. Thank you, Jesse. Okay, so at the beginning of every meeting, NCGS 138A-15E mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members that their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under Chapter 138. The chair shall also inquire as to whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at the time. Seeing none, we'll just disregard the second. Okay, so begin with, we're going to need to vote on the approval of the agenda for tonight, and I'll accept any motion on that. Still looking at motion. Motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Ms. Birch, second by Mr. Hardison.
Mike, can I say one thing with that? Committee members, can y'all make sure that your microphones are unmuted? There's a little button that's like red on the bottom. When you're unmuted, the light on the microphone itself is green. So when you speak, please make sure you're unmuted.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes without dissent. And our second order of business is to vote on the approval of minutes from our January 9th, 2025 meeting. I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Hardison,
A second.
second by Ms. Birch. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes without dissent. I think the first order of business tonight is, we're here to, view a presentation on and discussion on the adaptive management options for the blue crab fishery, management plan amendment 3. And, we're going to go ahead and get started on that. I'll turn the floor over to the staff.
Thank you, Mike. Hopefully everybody can hear me. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Your input is drastically needed as we develop this preliminary recommendation for the MFC. So to begin, good evening. My name is Robert Corbett. I'm one of the division's blue crab leads based out of the Elizabeth City office. Today, I have with me McLean Seward, the other blue crab lead based out of the Wilmington office. Today, we'll be discussing Amendment 3 adaptive management options and the division's preliminary recommendations for management changes in the blue crab fishery. Following this presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions before you vote on advisory committee recommendations. Today's presentation will begin with a recap of our current timeline. Following this, we'll look at the trends we've observed in the blue crab stock and revisit the adaptive management framework as outlined in Amendment 3 of the Blue Crab Fisheries Management Plan. We'll then transition into a discussion of potential management strategies, examining the pros and cons of each, before concluding this presentation with the division's preliminary recommendation. Once completed, we'll be glad to take any questions and would appreciate your input before you vote on advisory committee recommendations. To recap, a benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the blue crab stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring. Amendment 3 to the blue crab FMP was developed and adopted in response to the stock assessment results. At the May 2024 MFC business meeting, DMF presented the results of the 2023 stock assessment update, terminal year 2022, and highlighted concerns with the assessment's results and the diagnostics. The primary concern was the drastic change in the reference points between the benchmark and the update. Due to this and other issues identified by peer reviewers, the 2023 update will not be used for management purposes or to inform needed harvest reductions. We then continued our presentation discussing ongoing declining trends in our dependent and independent monitoring before outlining our plan to implement management changes through the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. In September, the division conducted outreach meetings with the Northern, the Southern, and the Shellfish Crustacean MFC Advisory Committees. Although public attendance was small, the meetings provided solid input from crabbers on current stock conditions and thoughts on how to pursue management going forward. After the AC meetings, leads continued outreach and analysis and began drafting the revision to Amendment 3. At the August and November MFC meetings, the division updated the commission on our progress. Today, we will be presenting the draft revision and providing the division's preliminary recommendations. After today, the division may reevaluate the preliminary recommendations before bringing the final revision to the MFC in May for the selection of management measures. Now, I would also like to state that originally this presentation was going to be given to the MFC at the February meeting. However, due to the snow, that delayed the meeting and it pushed it to March. This presentation was taken off the agenda. So at this time, the final vote for implementation may not be at the next meeting in May, and it will likely be pushed back to August. Before we get into the current stock trends, I want to take a few notes about the benchmark stock assessment, the updated assessment, and why we aren't using the updated assessment to inform harvest reductions. These figures show the estimated spawners, recruits, and the fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment and the update. The benchmark is shown in orange, the update is in blue. In all cases, trends from the benchmark and the update match extremely well. Spawners and recruits are declining and fishing mortality remains high. This means the benchmark and the update are telling us the same thing, and that the stock has continued to decline. The key difference between the benchmark and the update is the drastic change in the reference points. The figures on the top show the estimated spawners and the fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment. The reference points are illustrated by the dashed and dotted lines. The threshold reference point is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and or if overfishing is occurring. And as you can see, in 2016, the stock was considered overfished and overfishing was occurring, but not by much. And it hadn't been occurring throughout the entire time series. The figures on the bottom show the estimated spawners and fishing mortality from the updated stock assessment. On these figures, the threshold reference points is illustrated by the solid black line. Again, this is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and or if overfishing is occurring. As you can see, the reference points change drastically from the benchmark to the update, to the point where the stock status would be much worse than what was indicated by the benchmark stock assessment, and the results suggested the stock was always overfished and overfishing was always occurring. For these reasons, among others, and as peer reviewers recommended, the division agrees the stock assessment update should not be used to inform harvest reduction. In summary, the benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring as of 2016. In 2023, the assessment was updated with data through 2022. Although the trends of the update match closely to those of the benchmark, the resulting reference points exhibit significant and unexpected shifts. The reference points change to the extent where the stock status would be much worse compared to the benchmark, to the point where the stock would have been overfished and overfishing would have been occurring throughout the entire time series. To note, if the updated stock assessment was used to inform harvest reductions of at least 45% would be statutorily required, this meeting the threshold. The target reduction would be 56%. Due to the magnitude of change in reference points, An external review of the assessment update was completed in late December of 2023. Reviewers identified concerns with the model specification and the results and strongly recommended resolving these issues before basing any management decisions on the assessment update alone. Suggestions provided by the reviewers can only be incorporated with a new benchmark stock assessment. Given concerns identified by DMF and the external reviewers, the 2023 stock assessment update will not be used to inform harvest reductions. So even though that the updated stock assessment is not being used to inform harvest reductions, the update still provides useful information about the ongoing trends we're observing. These figures show the data through 2022, the terminal year of the assessment, and date all the way back to 1995. The top figure in black illustrates the estimated number of recruits or juvenile crabs in the stock, and the bottom figure in blue illustrates the estimated number of spawning females in the stock. As you can see, both figures clearly indicate steady declines, with the decline in spawners closely following the decline in recruits. Both showed the lowest estimates being in the later part of the time series, 2021 and 2022. These same declining trends in recruitment and spawner abundance are also captured in our independent sampling. Looking into some of that independent sampling, these figures show the abundance of both male and female blue crabs from our program 195 Pamlico Sound trawl survey. The figure on the left shows the recruit abundance, with the June survey shown on the top and the September survey shown on the bottom. The same applies for the figures on the right side of the screen, but for adult crabs. We consider adult crabs with a carapace width of 5 inches or larger, and recruits crabs be less than 5 inches. Please note that the scale of the y-axis is different for the graphs on the right side of the screen versus those on the left. Although there are some minor spikes through the time series, males and females of both life stages show continued declines or continued low abundance through 2022, with some of the lowest values in the time series in recent years, which is indicative of a low overall population. Moving on, the overall decline in recruits is further illustrated in these figures, which show both the male and female recruits from our program 120 juvenile trawl survey. Again, we're considering recruits as crabs less than 5 inches. Male recruits are on the top, female recruits are on the bottom. Both male and female recruits have seen steady declines through the time series, with the last few years being the lowest ever on record. Declines in recruits and spawner abundance estimated from the updated stock assessment are not only reflective in our fisheries independent sampling, but are also reflected in commercial landings. These figures show the commercial landings of all blue crabs from 1994 through 2023. Landings of all blue crabs have declined since the record high of 67 million pounds back in 1996. In 2022, the harvest level dropped to the lowest in the time series, only 9.5 million pounds. Also shown on this figure are the dates of important fishery management changes since the adoption of the original FMP back in 1998. It is important to note that until the adoption of Amendment 2 revision and Amendment 3, there had been no management that would directly limit harvest to any significant extent, yet landings have continued to decline. In addition to declining harvest levels, we see similar declines in participation and number of trips. The blue bars here represent the number of participants, which corresponds to the axis on the left. The orange line represents the number of blue crab trips, which corresponds to the axis on the right. Similar to the previous figure, dates for all important fisheries management changes since the adoption of the original FMP in 1998 through the adoption of Amendment 3 in 2020 are indicated. In 2023, North Carolina had less than 1/4 of the number of participants as we did back in 1996-97. And as for the number of trips, in 2023, North Carolina crabbers made slightly more than 1/5 of the number of trips recorded in 1998. This figure shows the annual hard crab landings on the left axis and the number of trips on the right axis. Since 1994, landings have declined in a similar pattern to the number of trips landing blue crabs. Now, we recognize and are well aware that factors other than a struggling stock can lead to these decreased landings, decreased trips, and fewer participants. But the fact is, we are also at an all-time low recruitment level, which is being observed in our independent surveys, which in combination provides strong evidence that these landing declines are indicative of a low population. And I'd also like to point out that the declines we've seen in North Carolina blue crab stock are not unique. Other states along the Atlantic coast have observed similar declines. In January 2023, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources released a status report for South Carolina blue crab fishery. The report concluded that the South Carolina blue crab stock has been in decline for nearly 2 decades and provided recommendations to preventing overharvesting, gradually reducing fishing pressure, prevent overexploitation, and strengthen enforcement capabilities. Shown here is a figure from the South Carolina report illustrating the coastwide commercial landing declines. Likewise, reports from the Chesapeake Bay indicate that although blue crab stock is not depleted and overfishing is not occurring, juvenile abundance remains low. Precautionary management focusing in on protecting mature females and juveniles has been recommended to the Chesapeake Bay stock, and a benchmark stock assessment has begun to better understand the population. Adaptive management options discussed today intend to counteract the long-term declining trends we've observed in our independent programs, as well as the data collected from commercial landings. The Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework is prescriptive in how it can be used and the steps that must be taken. There's 2 key points I want to highlight. First, since we do not have an updated stock assessment we can use to inform harvest reductions, but based on data we have from our independent sampling, all available information suggests Amendment 3 management is not working as intended and is not projected to meet sustainability requirements. As a result, the Adaptive Management Framework allows for reevaluation and implementation of revised and/or new management. Second, it's important to note that since management changes would be implemented through the Adaptive Management Framework adopted in Amendment 3, any management action the MFC pursues must be quantifiable. The meaning of quantifiable for adaptive management means that we must be able to estimate how proposed options will affect harvest. For example, a season closure is a quantifiable measure because we can use the data from previous years to estimate how harvest would be reduced. However, an additional culling would not be a quantifiable measure. As a reminder, the benchmark stock assessment projection indicated a minimum harvest reduction of 0.4% was needed to end overfishing, and a minimum harvest reduction of 2.2% was needed to achieve sustainable harvest and rebuild the blue crab spawning stock within 10 years of the date of the adoption, with a 50% probability of success, meeting the statutory requirement. Management adopted in Amendment 3 was estimated to reduce harvest by 2.4% with only a 50% probability of success. Projections indicated a 19.8% harvest reduction was needed to meet the female spawner abundance target with a 100% probability of success. Today, we're about halfway through the statutory required rebuilding period with very little indication Amendment 3 management will be meeting rebuilding targets. Therefore, adaptive management will be used to implement options that rebuild the stock closer to the spawner abundance target and have a probability of success closer to 100%. All options examined are estimated to result in a greater than 10% harvest reduction, and the division recommends options with a greater than 15% harvest reduction to increase the probability of success. Potential management strategies to counteract declining trends, which can be implemented through the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework, include size limit changes, prohibit crab trawling, season closures, and trip limits. Harvest reductions for each of these management options are quantifiable, so they meet the requirements of the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. We'll discuss the pros and cons of each of these options, providing the rationales for the division's preliminary recommendations. But before we get into these options, other management strategies suggested by stakeholders include pot limits, time limits, and increasing regulations on shedding operations. Due to limited data on true effort and data that accurately characterizes shedding operations, harvest restrictions from these options are not quantifiable, so they are not explored through the adaptive management. These options may be explored further during the next review of the blue crab FMP, which is currently set to occur in 2026. Another topic we've heard constantly from stakeholders is that predation by blue catfish and other species has led to the decline in the blue crab population. Stakeholders have suggested that this predation be considered in management of blue crabs and other species. Currently, we do not have the data needed to address these type of ecosystems-based management, but I am pleased to announce that several projects are underway to better understand the effects of the predation of blue crabs. I'll also note that currently we don't have the data necessary to quantify the recreational blue crab harvest, but it's generally assumed to be small. Currently, the recreational fishery is held to all the same restrictions as the commercial fishery, in addition to a limit of 50 crabs per person, 100 crabs per vessel per day. Any new management will also be applied to the recreational fishery. So the first option we'll discuss today is size limit changes. Currently, the minimum size limit for blue crab harvest is 5 inches carapace width statewide. For this management strategy, we have two options. We could increase the minimum size limit, or we could implement a maximum size limit. As for a minimum size limit, harvest reductions may not be met by increasing the minimum size limit, as undersized crabs quickly grow legal size and become susceptible to harvest. Crabbers will face higher labor costs due to increased cooling efforts, or crabbers may need to invest in larger coal rings. Law enforcement will require updated measuring tools to be manufactured, verified, and distributed, which could delay enforcement if new regulations are implemented quickly. Regional stock differences could lead to uneven harvest reductions, market price fluctuations, and economic uncertainty for crabbers. Additionally, maximum size limits alone will have minimal impact on reducing harvest and would need to be combined with other measures such as increasing the minimum size limit, gear restrictions, and/or season closures. This strategy is likely to be unpopular with crabbers, as larger crabs are often your most valuable. Since coal ring changes are unlikely to exclude larger crabs, crabbers will be burdened with the increased effort and time required to cull their catch, as oversized crabs will need to be identified and released. This strategy will be particularly burdensome during periods of high catch volume if the catch includes crabs from many size classes. So for these reasons, options for size limit changes were not developed. The next option we'll discuss is to prohibit crab trawling. This topic, we heard a lot of concern from stakeholders, primarily because of the conflicts between crab trawlers and crab potters, and because crab trawls primarily harvest mature female crabs. Overall, blue crab harvest from crab trawls contributes minimally to the overall harvest, generally accounting for less than 1%. This figure shows the blue crab harvest by crab trawls from 2019 to 2023, by month, each year color-coded. As you can see, most crabs are harvested from trawls December through April, and harvest is slightly variable from year to year. Due to the location and time of the year crab trawls operate, most of the crabs harvested by crab trawls are female of lower market value. Lastly, another issue is the continuing conflicts between trawlers and potters over fishing locations. But when discussing crab trawling, even at its peak, trawling made up very little of the overall harvest of blue crabs. For reference, even if trawling was prohibited in 2023, it is estimated that we would have only seen a 0.6% reduction in overall harvest. While trawls don't harvest a lot of crabs, this portion of the fishery harvests mostly females during biologically important times of the year, prior to spawning, your late fall, winter months. For example, of the 87,812 pounds harvested from trawls in 2023, we estimate roughly 70,000 of those pounds were female, overwintering in the mud, preparing to sponge out in the spring. Limiting harvest from this gear might have important stock benefits by protecting females and promoting recruitment. And it's important to note that currently there are very few crabbers participating in the crab trawl fishery. However, any further growth in this industry may be detrimental to the crab stock and recruitment. Pros for this management option include being easily enforceable and providing protections to female crabs, and it would alleviate conflicts between potters and trawlers. The cons for this option includes the fact that we'll only be affecting trawlers and that this management provides very little overall harvest reduction. Next, let's discuss extending the current season closures. Current regulations have the season closures from January 1st through January 31st for areas above the Highway 58 bridge, and a closure of March 1st through March 15th for areas south of the Highway 58 bridge. The options in this table show the estimated harvest reduction if the existing closures were extended and implemented statewide. Since effort can be increased during open periods to offset losses during the closed seasons, it is best to have seasonal closures at a minimum of 2 weeks, but preferably longer. These options show estimated harvest reductions compared to landings in 2023 and the average annual landings from 2019 to 2023. Please note, for illustrative purposes, this table has been color formatted to better display the reduction level. The darker the green, the higher estimated reduction. Let's take a look at the early season closures. Highlighted here indicates that the estimated harvest reduction we would have observed if the closure were to be extended statewide to include all of January and February, from January 1st to the middle of March, and from January 1st through the end of March. Even if we went to the extreme end, the January through the end of March closure, we would only expect a very minimal harvest reduction. This option would need to be combined with other measures to meet the level of harvest reduction needed. A significant concern that we've heard from the public is limiting the extent of any season closure to not affect peeler season due to the profitability of this fishery. Extending the season closure past March would indeed affect peeler season. For that reason, we did not develop any season closure options past the end of March. Listed here are some of the pros and the cons for extending the season closure in the early part of the year, and I'll just touch on a few of them. Some of the pros are protection provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons, and it's easily enforceable. However, extending the season closure in the early part of the year has drawbacks, the most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunity for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. So if we were to extend the season closures back into December, into November, or even October, we start to see the estimated harvest reduction increase drastically. Late season closures tend to be more effective in achieving harvest reductions because there's less opportunity for recruitment, and in the blue crab fishery, more crabs are being harvested later in the year than in the beginning. However, even though extending this closure period back and continuing through March results in a higher estimated harvest reduction, unless the closure is extended into at least November, the estimated harvest reduction is still low. Again, we're talking about a potential 5-month closure. Listed here are some of the pros and the cons. I'll just touch on a few again. Pros being protection provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning season, and again, it's easily enforceable. However, again, extending the season closures late in the year has major drawbacks, the most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunity for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. Moving on to our last management strategy, trip limits. Maryland and Virginia each manage blue crab harvest with some sort of trip limit in combination with other measures. Trip limits, unlike complete season closures, allow opportunities for crabbers to continue fishing, allowing for some harvest. Trip limits are adaptable and can be implemented seasonally or incrementally, accounting for market conditions and stock characteristics to evenly distribute harvest reductions across the fishery. Displayed here is a figure that indicates the average number of bushels being landed per trip by month from 2019 to 2023. Please note that this table has been color formatted by row to better display the percentages. When viewing this figure, we can clearly see that most commercial trips landing hard blue crabs land between 1 and 15 bushels throughout the year. However, we can also see that in the later months, we start to see a large increase in the number of trips landing above 30 bushels per trip. This happens relatively quickly without a gradual change. And we'll touch on this topic again as the presentation continues. So to begin examining trip limits, let's first discuss the possibility of implementing a year-round trip limit. This table represents the estimated harvest reduction at any given bushel limit for each month. For illustrated purposes, this chart has been color formatted by column to easily show the estimated reduction. The darker the red, the higher the reduction. But before we get into a year-round trip limit option, let's first go over the table a little bit. Again, this table represents the average percent harvest reduction we would have seen if a bushel limit was implemented from 2016 to 2023. The column to the left displays the months, and the column to the and the row highlighted here shows the bushel limit option. So if we were to investigate a 15 bushel limit in the month of October, we estimate we would receive a harvest reduction of 6%. Now, please note that these reductions assume there is no change in effort. And again, I would like to remind you that the chart is color formatted by column. So the 6% here is darker than the 9.6% here, due to the 6% being one of the largest reductions we would have seen from the 15 bushel limit column. So back to the options. A year-round bushel trip limit on all hard crabs of 15 bushels would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 31.9%. This would be option 1B in your decision document. For reference, a bushel limit of 20 bushels per trip would be an estimated of 22.6%, and a reduction of 10 would be a 45.6% reduction. Options 1A and 1C in your decision document. Please note that these estimates assume effort will stay the same. If effort increases during periods of high demand, high harvest reductions will likely not be realized. Moving on to option 2. We've constantly heard from stakeholders about the markets and how the markets at certain times of the year regulate harvest due to supply and demand. Several times we've heard from crabbers emphasize that any management should not restrict harvest during the summer months, your June to August, likely because many North Carolina crabbers make the majority of their profits during this time. Option 2 considers this input by implementing trip limits during biologically important periods for the blue crab based on life history outside the June to August timeframe. If we were to implement a 15 bushel limit for all hard crabs, but this time instituted from September to December, we estimate the harvest reduction would be 16.4%, option 2B in your decision document. Although this reduction is much lower than the previous option, which was 31.9%, roughly half, this reduction occurs in only 1/3 of the time period and is still estimated to be greater than 15% reduction. However, again, if effort changes, which it likely will, the estimated harvest reduction is unlikely to be met in times of high demand and availability. Option 3 is a combination approach between options 2 bushel limit and a season closure to increase the estimated harvest reduction. We heard a lot of comments from crabbers about management during the early part of the year, mainly that effort is extremely low during these times, which we do have trip ticket data supporting that, and supply is low. But the one thing to note is that during the winter months, prices for blue crab soar, primarily due to closures in other crab producing states. Options implementing trip limits early in the season would be less intrusive to the majority of crabbers due to the lack of trips during this time. Also, protecting crabs, primarily the females that made it through the winter months during this time of the year, just before they spawn, will help promote increased recruitment. So this option 3B in your decision document, looks at a 15 bushel limit from September to November and an extended statewide closure from December through March. This option would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 22.3%, which is much closer to options 1 reduction. The primary function of these options would be to limit catch, with the assumption that crabbers will change fishing practices not to exceed the trip limit. Proposed for all hard crab bushel limits is that reduced harvest could result in more crabs being able to reproduce because of the protections provided during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons. Regulations are simple and easily enforceable while distributing the reductions evenly throughout the state. But while trip limits for all hard crabs offers a straightforward approach to managing blue crab harvest, there are drawbacks. One concern is crabbers driven by high demand and prices may increase fishing effort beyond pre-regulation levels to meet demand, despite the trip limit. This could lead to a steady or increased pressure on the crab population, even if the daily trip limits are adhered to. For example, if I were a crabber that normally lands 20 bushels every other day, and a bushel limit of 10 was instituted, I may just simply increase my trips and start fishing every day, collecting 10 bushels, which will result in no reduction at all. I still fish the same number of pots, I just fish half my pots one day and the other half the next. Because of this, the estimated reduction for these options may be inflated due to the change in effort during times of high demand and high volume, your summer and your fall months. Furthermore, crabbers may fish pots less frequently, holding their catch in unfished pots to avoid exceeding the daily trip limit, constantly fishing more gear than necessary. Trip limits will also increase time to sort and cull catch and lead to discarding of smaller, legal sized, and lower valued crabs, as crabbers prioritize keeping the largest crabs to maximize the value of their catch within the limit. Now, to be clear, these options are limitless, but for time's sake, I will save that discussion. Now that I've displayed our thought process working through the numerous outcomes of limitless combinations, I would now like to dive into the division's preliminary recommendation. However, before I can do so, we have one more element that we have not yet discussed, and that's sex-specific management. See, crabs possess an amazing attribute, which is the ability for harvesters to easily differentiate crabs based on sex. And unlike most fish species we manage, we can target management aimed at conserving crabs based on their sex. This table shows the estimated harvest reductions from mature females only trip limits by month. Again, for illustrated purposes, this chart has been color-coded by column to easily show the estimated level of reduction. This table is very similar to the one that we just looked at in the previous slides, due to the majority of the reductions taking place in the fall months, months where primarily females are targeted. In addition, these females, which are usually your lesser valued market category, are getting harvested at higher rates at times of the year when their market value is even less. Most crabs during these later months are being sold in bulk and sold as culls, mixed, or straights. If we were to take our last option, option 3, and apply it to mature females only, lowering the bushel limit to 10 bushels instead of 15 from September to December, and prohibit harvest of mature females only from January through May, we estimate that this would result in a 17.1% harvest reduction, option 7 in your decision document. Unlike the first 3 options, the all hard crab bushel limits, harvest reductions estimated from this option may be low because of how females are targeted during these times of the year. At the end of the year, crabs, particularly females, become more available due to their location and mobility. When the water cools, males and female crabs separate. Females usually prefer saltier environments near inlets and stay relatively active and mobile. Male crabs become more lethargic as to not waste energy and stay in less saltier waters, usually your rivers. Crabbers that normally target males leave their pots in place, less pots than in the summer, and usually fish less often, every 3 to 5 days instead of every day or every other day, before finally picking up their pots due to the season closure. Crabbers that primarily target females tend to fish their pots more often, needing to constantly move their pots following the cast of females as they move. Crabbers targeting females during these times are not making nearly the profit margins they were in the summer months due to being mostly sold as culls in bulk and rely mainly on quantity to make it worth their effort. If we were to implement a mature female bushel limit in these later months, it is likely that effort may decline as not enough female crabs can be landed to make fishing profitable, leaving more females available for the next year's spawn. This option can further be modified to extend the 10 bushel limit from June to December. This option limits mature female harvest throughout the year rather than allowing for a completely open harvest during the summer, which should increase the abundance of spawning females. This option, option 8, is the division's preliminary recommendation. This option is a mature female 10 bushel limit per trip from June to December before switching to a zero harvest of mature females from January through May. This option is estimated to result in a 21.7% harvest reduction. And again, we are not using the updated stock assessment to inform harvest reductions because of concerns raised by the division and external peer reviewers. However, if we were to use the updated stock assessment, we would be statutorily required to implement a reduction no less than 45%. The division's preliminary recommendation is less than half of what would be required. I'll also note that this option would be applied to the recreational fishery as well. So the recreational crabbers would not be able to harvest mature female crabs from January through May. To reiterate, the intent of the division's preliminary recommendation is to promote blue crab recruitment and increase abundance by targeting management towards protecting female crabs. Mature females have a lower market value, and mature females are essential for the future of the blue crab stock. Blue crab FMP is currently scheduled to review in 2026, and if adopted, at that time, we will reevaluate the effectiveness of this management. Our approach is guided by the adaptive management framework, emphasizing clear, quantifiable, and uncomplicated management. This two-step option presented here exemplifies this straightforward approach, attempting to keep regulations simple. So the pros and the cons for this option. Pros: implemented in times of life history importance, providing protection to mature female crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons. And unlike the all hard crab bushel limit, if adopted, this option is likely to have crabbers fish all of their active gear instead of leaving it out like holding tanks, collecting the males and releasing the females once the female limit is met. This option would also likely result in an end to crab trawling due to most of the trawls being female, the catch being female in the late and early times of the year. This option would be implemented in times of high harvest and low market value and will not interrupt peeler season as mature females do not shed. In addition, there's a lot of literature that points to the first brood spring females being larger and more fecund. Larvae spawned in the spring show increased growth and development and lower mortality due to the lower water temperatures and higher phytoplankton concentrates. Protecting mature females en route to overwintering and allowing them to spawn in spring could result into an increase in recruitment and crab abundance. The cons. This option does have the potential to skew the blue crab's natural sex ratio. However, due to the way that we're currently harvesting crabs, with the overwhelmingly majority making up crabbers harvest late in the year, we may have already been doing that this entire time. In addition, this option will unevenly distribute the reductions throughout the state. Crabbers in high salinity areas, primarily those on the eastern side of the Pamlico Sound and the southern part of the state, will be more heavily impacted than crabbers in the western Albemarle Sound and the western side of the Pamlico Sound. So in conclusion, all available data indicates that the blue crab stock is not recovering as projected. While harvest reductions have occurred, these are likely the result of continued declines in the blue crab stock and not the results of management action. Today, we're nearly halfway through the statutory required Amendment 3 rebuilding period with little indication the stock recovery will be successful. Additional management should reduce harvest above the statutory required minimum to increase the probability of stock recovery, even when the variability in harvest is high. Lastly, to rebuild the female spawner abundance and promote recruitment, the division's preliminary recommendation focuses in on implementing protective measures for mature females only. This approach is designed to minimize the impact on crabbers by focusing on the protection of mature female crabs, which are generally your less valued sex economically, but are vital to the recruitment and the future of the blue crab stock. This direction aims to achieve sustainable balance between conservations and the needs of the industry. I would also like to thank you for your time and attention as I've outlined this complex topic and our thought process. As directed by the Marine Fisheries Commission, we explored numerous management options while integrating significant stakeholder input. We recognize the blue crab fishery as being vital to North Carolina's economy and fisheries, and any future management requires careful consideration. We believe our preliminary recommendation strikes a balance between protecting the blue crab stock through strategically timed harvest limitations and incorporating input we received so far from the blue crab community. Input received and continue to receive is needed as we aim to rebuild the declining stock while considering the concerns of those who rely on it. And as a reminder, after this meeting, the division will review your input and preferred management and may revise our preliminary recommendation if needed. The final revision, along with your recommendations, will then be brought back to the MFC at the upcoming May meeting for final vote. Again, this could be in August. And at this time, we will gladly answer any questions before you vote on advisory committee recommendations.
Thanks, Robert. Any committee members have any questions for Robert? Go ahead, Ms. Birch.
I do. This document was handed out to the Northern Advisory Committee and this document was handed out to the Northern Advisory Committee and the Southern Advisory Committee, and now we're here tonight. I kind of did some my own research. First, I would like to put to a motion that we move the vote to August with the abbreviated schedule. I understand that this was taken off and didn't allow for public comment during that March meeting. Moving that vote to August would allow the May meeting public comment, and it would also show a little bit of respect for the market participants by not having that vote in their busiest month. This motion also passed the Northern Advisory Committee and the Southern Advisory Committee.
I second it.
Okay, so you made a motion to,
Ask the Marine Fisheries Commission to move the vote to August to allow for public comment in May.
okay, we have a motion and a second. And any discussion?
So if we were to move that to August, would we be able to have updated data by that time? Of maybe this past year? I think that would, in addition to public comment, I think being able to have additional data maybe to make informed decisions would be helpful as well.
So by that time, we usually have our last year's update completed by usually May or June. Last year, when we originally presented to the MFC our adaptive management, just before that meeting, we received the finalized landing results.
Any more discussion? Anybody online? Okay, I'm gonna take the call to question. All in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me, Jesse, let's make this a roll call vote.
Perfect. Birch,
Aye.
Hammond, Hardison,
Aye.
Marshall,
Aye.
Morris, Mustin,
Aye.
Shepherd, Willis, Wilson,
Aye.
Service,
Abstain.
and Chairman Blanton.
Yeah, I'm gonna abstain.
I don't know why, but the X's aren't coming up on Birch and Hammond.
Yeah, there's two not marked.
And Hammond was an I, weren't you?
Hammond is absent.
She's the absent.
Okay, sorry.
Absent from Morris. Shepherd, yep. Okay, the motion passes. Scroll back up, please. 5-0, and whatever else we have on the end down there. Okay. Now, any more discussion with,
I definitely
in
do.
regards to the presentation and with staff?
Yes.
Questions, discussion?
First, I would like to, where do I want to start? Sorry. Okay, I know y'all have talked to me a lot this, reason, but first, I really would like to point out the fact that Amendment 3 has the fact that we have to be able to have a quantifiable measure. I don't know if you can put that up there, what Amendment 3 says. Members of the board, that is actually on your page 1 of that document that I just handed you. And it says that we have to have a quantifiable measure. Right now, we didn't just fail by a little bit. Our reviewer from Duke said that no new adaptive management should be made. That model showed a 90% probability, or what is it exactly? 90% of the population was removed from the fisheries. That is we don't see it on the water. We're not seeing it here. COVID-19 during 2019 through, I think, 2023 had an industry-wide reduction of effort. This is something that was not in your models. It's not a natural thing, and COVID-19 fishing reduction efforts were absolutely not natural. It's not something that any of your models would have predicted. And the problem is that if your premise that reduce and catch would, and your models were correct, we reduce catch, then what did we have? If you got, I think it's 19% with 100% probability of a rebuilt stock. Just so everybody knows, the life cycle of a crab is 3 years. So anything that you're looking at past 3 years, those crabs aren't alive. Females become mature between 12 and 18 months and they don't grow anymore. Clutches are now since 2006. And if you read your review, there was an issue between the 2007, 2008 timeline. But clutches, they have between 7 and 9 clutches in a season. Clutches over winter have less viability. And of those clutches, you have 500 to 8 million eggs. Okay, so that is a lot of babies. I know with each, between the zoa period and onward, there's a lot of mortality. But what I learned last night that I didn't know is that when you look at the model and you change the variable for natural fishing die-off, please let me know if I've been reading a month, okay? I'm not a biologist. I'm a crabber. Not really, but dealer. You know what I mean? So if I say something wrong, please correct me because I'm trying to learn too. But you should have seen so you say that with a 19% reduction in harvest, we had 100% probability of a rebounded stock. Are you finding that for me? Yeah. So spawner abundance target, 100% probability. If you look at the catch reductions, not from stock, but because people couldn't have barbecues. You couldn't have picnics. It was against the law. Where do you think a lot of our crabs go? The fishing reduction, on that paper that I also gave you, I noted a study from Dr. Cole that actually looked at the business as usual, model, and this is the ecological, it is not the economic. But the biomass return, because of the short lifespan, drastically increased in that model. Now, when we're looking at staff's model, we're still seeing a decline, which would show that they had an amazing opportunity to test a theory and it didn't show. We don't have we don't have a model to be able to look at what we've already done. Amendment 3 was enacted in 2020. So this thing was enacted, we put in bigger cold rings, we expanded the nurseries, correct? That was also thing. I know you said it wasn't quantifiable, but today I actually found a new study that has the quantifiable methods of extending some things. So I'd like to share that with you in addition to these. So I don't even understand why we're looking at this. The science doesn't fit. There was a reduction with COVID straight up. We know that. We know we have studies done in the last 15 years. I'm sorry, but y'all's research, not using any studies in the last 15 years, is insane. I know I've said it again and again, but for these people here that haven't been to the other meetings, I'm going to say it again. There's been 2007 is when they found out about the clutch. What, Darnell, was your last, in 2009, was your last reference. I think we're really missing it, but I also want to speak to all of the guys here. They got your attention. We're going to have to work to fill in all these gaps. They don't know. And I will say that I don't think it's intentional. I do, but I think it's a lack of knowledge and a lack of experience. And the only way they're going to get that is from talking to you. But just like I've said before, it's got to go through and we've got to build the trust. So y'all get the data, y'all get correct data, and then you analyze it using all the brains, the scientists, the fishermen. Everybody's got to do this at the same time. But right now, I'm going to keep this up for a discussion before I make a motion, but I might come back. And we are voting after public comment, right? Okay. Because I'm not going to keep this meeting. Anybody else have questions?
Anybody else? Any discussion?
If I can get my, okay, there we go. I guess the only thing that I'm concerned with is when we do these catch reductions, I don't know if when we make these recommendations or how we go about it. I mean, to hit on the business aspect of it, I mean, there's no compensation for that catch reduction. I mean, if like you said, if we do the 19%, then I mean, if we directly correlate that, and that's a 19% reduction in income. I mean, where is the substitution in that? I mean, what are you going to do when you lose 20% of your income when you go? I don't know what we can recommend on that, whether that's to the, I don't know, the General Assembly as like a subsidy or something to incentivize people to not do catch reduction if that's something that we do. I don't know. I mean, to say, like if somebody came to me and said, there's 20% of your income's going to go down, I would probably not say things that I can't say on this right now. I mean, I'd be pretty infuriated. So I don't know if this is the right answer when we come back and everything. What do we recommend in compensating people for a reduction in their income? I mean, to me, that's crazy. You can't, you know.
I got something to say about that. The difference is that was another thing that I talked with staff about. I don't think that you can change what you can say from one meeting to another, because I think we've talked about a few things that I think you understand now they're wrong. But it's not like if I don't catch females in the Currituck Sound, the northern Currituck Sound. It doesn't matter how many times I move my daggone pots, the females aren't there, I don't catch them. The guys that catch females. They don't catch males. So this is not oh, it won't hurt them. The economic impact means that you are shutting down whole areas. Just like he said, 10 bushels, we're gonna make it where it doesn't make enough to go out. And the thing is, we don't have just 500 pots. We can't fish more than 6 because of the time it takes, the effort it takes. This is not a machine. It's not going to be, if there's more crabs, we're gonna always have this much more in the pots and then the guys can do more. Your underlying assumptions of how crabbing works is where I believe that a lot of this faulty information is coming from. But it is not look, only so many people catch per bushel over. No, this is market segments that really depend on these females. This is not across the board population. Sorry.
Mr. Hardison, you good?
Yeah.
I've got, if nobody else does, I've got a few items that I'd like to touch on. If Jesse, can we start all the way back to the pie graph? Where it shows participation. There we go. That's exactly what I want. If we take a look at this pie chart, we look at the gears that pursue blue crabs in the fishery. And if we take notice that crab and peeler trawl is 0.6% of the landings, and crab pots are 98% of the landings, what does that tell you? It tells you that the majority, vast majority of crabs caught in this state are caught with a crab pot. I'd like to point out that these surveys that are done to estimate abundance of crabs are done with crab trawls, or a trawl net, not a crab trawl, a trawl net. And so my point here is that if only 0.6% of blue crabs are landed with trawls and 98% are landed with crab pots, are we surveying correctly?
So
And I'll go on to add that at best, your trawl survey only shows that the animals are just occurring in that area. Not an accurate method for assessing abundance. The assessment should be based on sampling with the appropriate gear during all life stages. It should be ongoing and annual. And so what I mean by that is that as crabs do certain things, you pursue them differently. They have different mannerisms, actions. They change their complete way of doing whatever they're doing into another life cycle. And so hard crabs, you bait them with bait, with a passive crab pot device. And if they're hungry for that particular bait, they'll go in there because they want to eat. If them crabs are going to shed, they're going to go into a place where they can hide. And so that requires a peeler pot. And if a female is going to shed, she's going to actually try to look for a jimmy. The jimmy's not going to go looking for her. And so you have to understand these mannerisms to be able to pursue crabs altogether. And the only reason crab trawls are successful at certain times of the year is because of water temperature. Those crabs have just become just lethargic enough that they're got just enough energy to get out of the mud and just be present. And so I think it's significant to look at these surveys and to say, are we doing it correctly? Now, my next point, Jesse, if you would, go to the landings, harvest, and participation graph. If you take notice here, that'd be fine. I think it's one slide before or after. Okay, the next one's fine. So if you took notice to both of those slides and both of those graphs, what you'll notice is sort of the same trend. Landings, participation, and trips. It's three pieces of data. Now, this is just rough math. And I've been told I've been pretty good at math at times, but I even used a calculator. But from 2016, I gathered from your information in the statistics book that there was 864 participants that landed 732,243 pounds. In 2023, there was 461 participants that landed 15,345,283 pounds. Now, from 2016 to 2023, that was a reduction of 38% in harvest landings and 47% in participation. That's reduced levels. That's operating at those reduced levels. Every year in landings, this is compared to 2016, 2017, we landed 27% less with 19% less participants. 2018, we landed 34% less than 2016 with 24% less participants. 2019, we landed 10% less with 28% less participants. 2020, we landed 47% less with 37% less participants. 2021, 49% less with 38% less participants. In 2022, we landed 63% less with 46% less participants. I just can't understand how it is that we didn't get a reduction at all from 2016 levels, when simple math, pulling data from the statistics, tells the different story. That's not to mention all the environmental factors that I could make a long list of. The hypoxic events, the anoxic events, meaning the drainage from rain runoff, the salt wedges that come up the sound at times, that run the crabs for miles and miles and piles them up in small areas sometimes. The predation, and more specifically speaking, blue catfish. There has been an absolute explosion of that Albemarle Sound of blue catfish, and your data shows it. SAV. We've had some good years where we had SAV show up the sound. And I think if you could take that SAV and measure it and measure the success of the recruitment out of that SAV, you would see significant differences from when there is SAV there and when there's not. Landfalling hurricanes. 2016, we had Hermine, Julia, Matthew, that dumped tremendous amounts of rain and ran them crabs down to right out of in this area right over here. And the boys were catching 120 baskets of crabs with 200-300 pots. How about it, Huckleberry? I seen a picture with you, buddy. The boys got pictures of it. This is what happens in this fishery. But what happens in this fishery, no one can gauge unless you're there every day to see all of these things happen and how it affects the true blue crab population that's there. And so I just wanted to kind of put that on record as some thinking, some things to think about, you know, because this is significant data too. And if a common man can take this data and look at it and see that we've been operating at reductions throughout the entire time series, then how is it that we're being asked to do more for the fishery in a way that would be intrusive and biased to the users? It's the recommendation as it stands by the division is very intrusive and biased. Some people it won't affect, hardly at all. Some people will probably put them completely out of business. You know, I can say that millions in cumulative investments by hundreds of small businesses, to include the crabbers themselves, whether they're operating as a sole proprietor or under an LLC, dealers, processors, shedding operations, suppliers, wholesalers, retailers, transportation. The list goes on of who would be affected by all of this. This is no small task, but it's no light. It's not taken lightly, you know, to be asked to do things when you know differently from what you see every day on your boat, as these gentlemen see, ladies and gentlemen. And so I wanted to bring that, you know, to your attention and to the attention of the committee, to the attention of the public, that, you know, while you say one thing, we're observing differently. And the data, the socioeconomic data is even telling you different. The landings data is telling you differently. And so I feel like if we were to have the appropriate surveys put in place, done appropriately by seasoned fishermen, seasoned crabbers, it would contradict quite extensively. And I mean, I could contradict your data on my boat every day, you know. And so I just have a hard time accepting that being asked for a 20% reduction in such a way that would be extremely intrusive and biased.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to address many of your concerns that you just spoke up. And I mean, my handwriting's atrocious, so if I don't touch on all of them, just let me know. But to get at your last point, when we talk about reductions, the division no reduction needs to be treated lightly. We take every reduction serious, whether it's 20% or 1%. We feel that any reduction needs to be thoroughly vetted. We need to talk to crabbers. We need to have these committee meetings. When we were talking about trawlings in the beginning, the majority of our trawling is done to catch juvenile crabs. We're talking very small crabs. So at that point in time, in that life stage that we're studying, usually trawls are recommended as a good practice. And I will 100% agree with you. We do not have things such as a pot study, but that comes down to funding. We have a lack of resources, and for years and years, the division has put in for funding such projects as what you were talking about. We would love to see projects such as a pot study or something that aims to better catch crabs at different times of the year in different locations as adults in their life stage. As for the predation, that's one of the topics that we touched on slightly. Knowing that Maryland and Virginia have a hard predation trouble with the blue catfish, you know, we're still following those trends. There's current studies going out there looking at the predation of the blue crab stock by catfish and other species like red drum. But to get on that topic more, Jesse, if you would, we have some pocket slides. It's the last three. And this really does emphasize your point of just the explosion that we've seen in the Albemarle Sound with catfish alone. So the first one here is the statewide blue crab versus catfish landings. Now, I would like to point out that blue catfish are not differentiated. This is all catfish species. We usually didn't see the induction of really blue catfish until around the 2008 when they became noticeable. But again, this trend is shown that the catfish landings have spiked dramatically. However, the blue crab stock and blue crab landings have seen a similar, like just a streamline decline. So there's not really a jump that's exponential. And Jesse, if you go to the next one. The first graph was a little bit of misleading because I had different y-axes on each, which I wish I would have explained the first time. This is if the pounds were the same. So this kind of shows you that blip in catfish, depending, because when you do any chart that has two y-axis, I can change the axis to meet whatever. So it's not really the crossing point. What you're looking at is the rate of increase or the rate of decrease. So this chart here shows that same chart, essentially just for the same number of pounds, and that blip is noted. And then finally, we have a third one. This really more addresses your concern in the Albemarle Sound. This is a chart showing the statewide blue crab landings versus our program 135 catch per unit effort of blue catfish. Now this is just blue catfish. And this shows you that right around 2008, we started seeing the blue catfish in the Albemarle Sound. Our program 135 is a gillnet study that is done in the Albemarle Sound from November through May. And as you can see, exponentially, even though there's been changes in that program, that we are catching catfish at a huge rate. And lastly, what I did want to mention again, how we don't take any reductions taught lightly. This is just our preliminary recommendations. They can change before we bring it to the MFC. Adaptive management requires that any action that we pursue must be quantifiable. We are not held to a 20%. We are not held to a 15, a 5. We can do as little as 1%. As long as we can quantify that action, that's an action that we can take during adaptive management. So we're still open for interpretation, and our preliminary recommendations can change. Now, when we talk about what type of reduction we were looking for, that was a lot of discussion between staff. And where do we go from here? We had a failed stock assessment. You know, right when we started seeing the crash around that 2022 time period, the lowest landings ever recorded on data, 9.5 million pounds. We knew we had a stock assessment update coming out. So we were anticipating using that update so it could let us know what type of direction we should go towards when we talked about harvest reductions. Unfortunately, as we explained, that update failed peer review, and it failed due to the drastic change in the MSY reference points. So from that, we talked about where do we go from here. Obviously, from our trends and data, we weren't seeing any improvement. So for that, our tool bag is very thin. As fisheries managers, one of the only tools that we have is harvest reduction. So then we say, if we go with adaptive management, we have to quantify a number that we could reach. What number should that be? We can't just pick a number out of thin air. We need to justify that number. So what we did, since we reverted back to the benchmark stock assessment with the terminal year being 2016, it stated that a 19.8% harvest reduction was needed to meet the female spawner abundance with 100% probability of success. And since we're roughly halfway through that rebuilding period with no signs of success, that's what we chose as a starting point. So the presentation that went on, we focus in on harvest reductions anywhere in your decision document from 10% all the way up through 50%, just showing you those changes. Now, the division at this current time would recommend a 20% reduction, slightly more than what was needed to meet 100%, only because we're almost halfway through that statutory required rebuilding period. So in hopes that we can see the stocks turn around. Now, We will also be in agreement that 2023 was an improvement in landings and 2024 was an improvement on top of that. And we hope that we ride this train and it continues to improve. And hopefully by the time Amendment 4 comes out, we won't need to make any reductions and we will see that everything is working. But currently, we're held and we're halfway through that required statutory rebuilding period. So we were hoping to make little action now so that we won't have to make a drastic change later. And Ms. Birch, to your point, as you said before, the peer reviewers did talk about the updated stock assessment, and they did give us options that maybe we could make some changes in the updated stock, make changes to the updated stock assessment for approval. They gave us some ideas. However, any of those options that they provided to us would require us to do a new benchmark stock assessment. Essentially, we would be starting the project all over again.
May I speak again on this? Can you show me the blue crab, or the catfish landings?
Oh, hold on,
Yeah.
wait, we have a virtual attendee
Sorry.
that has, that would like
No, no,
to
go
chime
ahead.
in. Thanks. Go ahead, Ms. Mustin. Can you hear me?
Okay, can you guys hear me? I was having some difficulty with the microphone during the whole
Brasai, you're very, very quiet. We can barely hear you.
Okay, I do apologize. If someone could read out what I said in the chat, that would be great. I apologize.
Unfortunately, Brasai, we're still not able to hear you.
Can you type it? I seen something pop up on the screen where she was in a chat.
Yeah, if you want to type it in the
If you
chat, I
type
can
your
read it out
question in,
for you.
yeah.
I can't see the chat while we're sharing the presentation, but I can while we're not. So Brasai had a couple of questions in here. The first one was, what is 80% of the 0.6% from on the crab peeler trawl on our pie chart?
So listed at the bottom, the 80% was the amount of females landed from trawls. So out of that 0.6% of crabs landed that were trawls, 80% of those crabs we predict to be mature females.
Thank you, Robert. And she also says, please consider the Virginia studies that were presented in our last committee meeting regarding the female protections and spawning increases after management strategies implemented and were successful. However, commercial landings and environmental agencies did not see an increase in overall population.
That's all you had. Is that all you have? And did he answer your questions correctly? Sufficiently? She agree, okay, okay. Mr. Service.
Yeah, question, Robert. Sorry. I'm wondering about the benchmark stock assessment. How are we certain, and I haven't read the peer review, and I'm not sure I'd follow it if I did, but how certain are we that the benchmark stock assessment is more precise, more accurate than the follow-up stock assessment? How are all stock assessments peer reviewed, or just stock assessments that are where there's questionable data and there's a request for review?
So the benchmark stock assessment did good through peer review and how they began the process and walked through the steps. And once the benchmark stock assessment was completed, it was accepted and through peer review. Now, since the updated stock assessment, we saw those drastic change in the MSY reference points.
Right.
And that's really what failed through peer review and through us, because it's clearly noticeable. And that's what failed with the update. Now, saying that, the update is the same formula that was used in the benchmark. So the reason that we reverted back to the benchmark is because at that time, that's the best data that we have to this point. That's been peer reviewed and approved.
Would you have had the sort of same level of concern if not for the benchmark stock assessment? Was your concern the difference between the two, or was it an absolute concern with the follow-up assessment? Yeah.
Apologies for that. So to get back at your question, it's a combination. So the drastic change from one to the other is already a concern right there. But the updated stock assessment also stated that overfishing was always occurring and the stock had always been overfished through the entire time series in the assessment. That was one of the reasons that it failed peer review and obviously through us.
And the peer reviewer suggested that making decisions based on the assessment they advised against that. Did that also suggest that none of the data in the stock assessment should be used or used in combination with other data?
No, so the failed peer review of the assessment does not invalidate the data that went into it. It was just the outcome, the formula used to really give us that threshold and that target harvest reductions. The data into it still is valid.
And you saw some of the same trends in your follow-up assessment, even though the absolute numbers and the reference points were drastically different. You did see some of the same trends in the follow-up assessment as you did in the baseline assessment. Isn't that right?
Correct. The updated assessment, the trends match extremely well.
And that's meaningful, isn't it?
Correct.
So that is usable data coming out of that second follow-up stock assessment.
Correct. And that's one of the reasons that we've decided to put forth adaptive management to counteract some of these long-term declining trends that we've been seeing in the blue crab stock.
I saw the same thing Chairman did in the curves that mirrored one another in terms of effort and landings, and that they mirror one another. And I've seen that in other stock assessments. And I'm wondering, it's really a demographic issue and a fisheries issue and a chicken and egg issue. Do fishermen fish less because they're catching less, or is the reduced effort because there are fewer fishermen participating for whatever demographic reason? Is there any literature that really dives into that issue? And it might be specific to a particular population, but are you aware of any literature? Or do you have any sort of inside knowledge or specific knowledge about how those sort of dynamics work?
Currently off the cuff, I don't have any, but if we do have any, we can follow up on this at a later time. I will state that crustaceans in general are extremely difficult to monitor and to predict, especially through stock assessments. I mean, it's not just North Carolina, it's the entire world. Crustaceans are very hard to model. Now, saying that, comparing landings to, say, recruits, we're comparing apples to oranges. Landings, as many of you know, there's so many factors that go into place. As Commissioner Blanton mentioned, environmental factors, markets, SAV. I mean, there's so many factors. So landings really just show us in the stock assessment is how many crabs are being harvested from the overall population. What we show by the juveniles is the number of crabs entering into that population. Now, we have other things that take it out, like natural mortality, which is extremely difficult for us to monitor. But what we're seeing is not enough crabs are entering in to the fishery than being removed from the fishery, and it's not sustainable. So it's really the combination approach of the lower landings and our low abundance in juvenile crabs that we're seeing from our surveys.
And one last question, that makes good sense, thank you. And, you've been doing this trawl survey for a long time. How long has the trawl survey been running? The different programs?
So there's different surveys that get involved. Program 100, which happens in the Albemarle Sound, I believe first began some parts of it in the 50s, but then later modified in the 70s and continued since then. Program 120, I don't know off the cuff, but it's since 1978.
And is it a problem that it's not as efficient a method of catching crabs and it's not the same methods that the crabbers are using? Would it not still show relative abundance and trends in population, regardless of whether it mirrors the methods being used by the fishermen and is the most prevalent type of gear used by the fishermen?
Correct. So our surveys are a data collection survey. We are not fishing. We are not constantly locating crabs. We are consistently going to the same areas and at times randomizing these areas to see if there's a difference, to really look at the overall population. We have areas that may have never caught crabs since the beginning of the trawl. And that's to show that if we start seeing crabs where we have been seeing, maybe they're going to show up in these areas. I mean, the zero catches is still information.
All right, and I do have one more question. I promise I'll stop after this one. Are there any requirements in other states or other fisheries that require or have a time limit like we do with set nets, a time limit on how leaving pots in water, leaving gear in the water?
Yes, and I believe in the revision packet, you should see a list of regulations from other states in the coastal area.
Did you consider that option? Is that a viable option? Is it particularly burdensome for fishermen, or is it a viable option for harvest reduction?
So time restraints is an option that has been presented to us by stakeholders in many of our conversations. However, due to a lack of data of the actual what a time limit could be, we deemed that non-quantifiable, so that cannot be completed through the adaptive management framework. If we were to implement, say, a time limit or a pot limit, we would need to revisit it in the next FMP, the Fisheries Management Plan Amendment 4.
It wouldn't be quantifiable without a stock assessment. The stock assessment is the only way to quantify
It-
that
it-
type of reduction.
No, so it wouldn't be quantified unless we had a better characteristics of effort that went in. Because
Okay.
currently we have no data showing us what's the average time a man or woman sets her pots, how long is it soaking for, how long it takes to collect X number of pots. So for that reason, it's deemed non-quantifiable.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chairman.
Can I follow up on some information about questions that he just had?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, market participants, I can kind of speak to that. So you see the market participants going down. This is a really labor intensive, early rising, demanding job. Some would say it's stinky, but a lot of people would say it smells like money. Overall, labor intense industries have been going down. Over 88% of the labor force growth since 2019 has been from migrant workers. Our young people, if they want to stay in it, most of the time they hit about 17 and they've heard, why do we want to invest and bank our future on an industry that they don't feel heard? We know that we're missing data, but you're talking about slashing whole industries, and you can't show me where the lack in harvest has equaled an abundance in spawners, recruits, any of that. You should have, if your hypothesis is correct, you should have that upward line. That's what I have to say about it has nothing to do with the lack of crabs. It has to do with the trust of this industry that it's going to be here. It's not there. It's a hard job. And that's why it is not because there's not crabs. And there you have the fair weather crabbers that come in when it's good and then come out when it's bad. But I do have a question. Why are your charts different about the millions of pounds in like the 2024 fish dealer report and then the charts that are up here. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's mainly your 2021 pounds and then your 2022 pounds. Compare, here, I've got this right here. I would like to know why there's such a difference in poundage. Because if you look at that and then you go back to your chart with the little participants and the pounds landed, why is there such a difference? Because that shows a greater reduction in the paper that I just gave you. And then it also goes to say that we were on the rebound. See what I'm saying there? That COVID-19. Well, final thing I'd like to say to you as well about stock assessment, there is no designated crab stock survey. Program 100 and program 120 were designed for fish.
So, just to comment, I'm trying to find the discrepancy between the pounds harvested. So our charts do not show 2024, we only show the 2023. And the y-axis is a different labeling.
Oh, I 100% understand, but if you look at 2020 on your chart that I just handed you, and then you look at 2021, there's a
Hold
mark.
tight right quick, because we had no reference to the chart that's been handed to the biologist, and that nobody else can see what the chart and what you're trying to point out.
Sorry, it's on page 19 of what I just gave y'all, or 9 that I just gave y'all. I have other copies if the public would like.
Mike, if you give me 1 second, I might better pull it up on here.
Okay, so hold that question. And Ms. Mustin is got her hand back up. Go ahead, Ms. Mustin, see if we can hear you now. Yeah.
All right, guys. I just wanted to state that, like, when a regulatory agency does things like they did with the oyster polluted relay, the harvest relay, and declines participation, or discourages participation, excuse my misspoken word there, it hinders the industry in a way that new participants don't get involved. Like, my kids don't want anything to do with my Shellfish franchise because they don't believe it can make money in 10 years. It's not what you can make money in 3 or 4 years. It's what you can do in 10 years. Is it a reliable business? And is that because the industry is shutting us down, or is that because the stock is actually that low? And I think the same thing falls over for blue crabs, because we deal with a lot of blue crabs. We deal with a lot of crab fishermen in around our leases and franchises. Obviously, it's a very healthy part of the ecosystem. So naturally, you have predation of blue crabs on the oyster farms or on the leases or on the natural reefs where they're rebuilding for shoreline erosion protection. And I think it's important to look at that.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you for your comments. I did want to state exactly what you were saying. Just the issue is, is it because regulation is putting it out, or are we seeing the decreased stock? To the point where I would like to mention that North Carolina is one of the least regulated states when it comes to the crab fishery. Right now, we currently have some of the least regulations when it comes to crabbing.
Doing quite
Other
well.
states such as Virginia, Maryland, even South Carolina now have more regulations than we do.
I don't think it's about regulations. I think when you discourage participation on a large scale, that the next generation coming up doesn't see it as a viable source of income. And so then what you see in your results of harvest from the commercial fisheries and the trip tickets doesn't represent a stock. And it's already stated that the stock assessment has failed. That's why we're looking back 10, 15 years at stock assessments. You're not sampling the way that harvest happens. You sample with a trawl, you don't sample with a pot. You harvest with a pot, you don't, on the most part, 0.06 is a very small, 80% of 0.06 for females is a very small amount compared to the entire industry. So I don't think it's we're less regulated than other states. If we regulate this industry down to where our commercial fishing industry in North Carolina fails and our crabbers stop crabbing, Virginia is still going to crab and South Carolina is still going to crab. You're seeing it in the same thing with the flounder. And guess what? Prices in flounder are low in South Carolina. They're high here. If you discourage participation and you regulate the industry to a part where the commercial fishing industry cannot produce a sustainable harvest for the market, for the consumers at mass, then they're going to go to other states for those food sources. For that economic benefit is going to be outsourced to other states. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mustin. Go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
I just have some comments in regard to, the overall conversation discussion we've had so far. First thing regarding the trawl surveys. So I think, ideally, we could get, some sort of comprehensive survey that captures, age class, sex class, size classes would be great. With that said, though, actually I have a data set when our grant ends this summer that one of the first pot data sets that we can provide. So hopefully that'll be a piece to that puzzle. With that said, though, we see other states also not using pot studies as well. Maryland or Chesapeake region in general, they use a DREAD survey, which has actually gotten a lot of praise. We see actually a lot of success if you look at the past trends with that survey. It actually seems to be do a really good job of forecasting overall abundance for that upcoming year. So on that note, I do think it is worth mentioning that I think we talked about eliminating crab trawls. I think that would be a low-hanging fruit. It only, in terms of harvest reduction, it sounds like it would really not make much of a dent, less than 1%. However, as Robert mentioned, and even the literature suggests, there's a 2023 paper that came out that those crab trawls, this was in the Chesapeake region, were comprised of really highly fecund, typically larger first-year spawners and second-year spawner females. So I think that would be a low-hanging fruit, and in fact that although it wouldn't provide much of a dent in terms of harvest reduction, I think it would really disproportionately protect the female spawners. In terms of, I know there's been some discussion on landings data tonight. I think landings data in general is really tough to interpret. We have this figure right now up. I think landings data is probably some of the hardest in all of fisheries science to interpret. Landings and participation in trips, those can all be impacted by external factors. Operating costs could lead to changes in that. Market value changes could lead to changes on all of these indices. or even, regulatory measures, which has been talked about. So, I'm not sure if that's the most reliable piece of data necessarily to try to interpret some of this from. In terms of some of the other discussion of, I think seems to be a problem with, predation, SAV, water quality, maybe some things that are outside of our or the division's control. I think there's definitely, in all of fisheries been a push recently in, the past decade or so towards ecosystem approaches and ecosystem models. That's going to take some time, but, I think that's certainly worth considering. And in terms of the stock assessment, I know there's been a lot of discussion so far about the stock assessment rejection. And I think Mr. Service talked about other stock assessments. To my knowledge, stock assessments occasionally are rejected by external reviewers. And this is not just for, this fishery. There's other state fisheries, there's federal fisheries, or even international and intergovernmental fishery groups that have had stock assessments failed by external review. And a 2020 paper did come out where they reviewed a lot of the most recent stock assessment failures or rejections. And what they found in that paper is that just because the stock assessment failed doesn't mean that there's nothing that can be used from that. As we mentioned, some of these trends do seem to match. So we can still use those trends, maybe not the outputs, but those trends still have value. The only difference in the fact that the stock assessment failed or was rejected by external review is that we just have to, there's more uncertainty with that, that data set or that trend. But, I think I'd be more so concerned with some of the long-term trends in some of these indices like spawner abundance or recruits. I'd be more so concerned with some of those long-term trends rather than just the concerns of the stock assessment model. And even with that said, even if we had a great stock assessment, that's just a piece, one piece to this. We don't necessarily always, it's not the be all end all for all decisions, right? We still, have to consider some of these long-term trends in hand with stock assessment outputs.
Can I ask you a question? Because you sound like a scientist, right? You do, okay, sounds great. All right, so all right, this stock assessment's failed by saying that it was unrealistic that 90% of the stock had been taken out. Is that normal for other stocks to fail that bad?
I'm not familiar with all the details of all the other, a lot of these are international fisheries, European
Yep.
fisheries have a lot of stock assessments that have been rejected. I'm not familiar, I haven't dug too deep into the literature of what exactly, those harvest reductions are in those models. What I will say is, to my knowledge, fisheries stock assessments are extremely complex and extremely sensitive. So, if anything, if we're using the same model and same formula from the 2018 assessment, then, it's with 6 new years worth of data, it's not, I'm partially not surprised to see, without any changes to model parameters or specifications, it would be logical for it to fail sometimes in that case. And with that said, a lot of states or government agencies, and I talked about the federal level, a lot of them, whenever a stock assessment is rejected by external review, and the 2020 paper has all this information as well, there's typically some sort of fallback approach. And typically that fallback approach is to resort to the most current, recent, available, and best data. So in this case, I think that would be appropriate to refer back to the 2018 stock assessment. And also, that the most recent data of some of these long-term trends with, spawner abundance, recruit abundance, those sorts of indices.
But by that logic, even using the same data, we had the reduction that gave us 100% probability of a stock rebound.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics of the model or the model specifications or parameters. I can't speak too much to
Yeah,
that.
but
I
doesn't
don't
that
know.
make sense? If we met that land reduction, we're using that logic, we're using that assessment.
I've got a couple follow-up questions, just real quick, and then we need to get to the
Okay,
public here.
yes.
They've been waiting patiently to have their time. So I wasn't gonna get too tuned up into the stock assessment, but I do have a couple of questions. Why did this, so one, why did the assessment, start in 96, 4, 6? At the peak of harvest, when there was harvest for decades before that? And then an additional question to that, does the stock assessment model consider the number of participants?
So to answer your first question, any model that you look at, regardless of fishery, you look for constants. So at the beginning, in the 1994, when the stock assessment, the benchmark stock assessment started, that was because the trip ticket started at that point in time. So that way we could have a constant of what was landed in the numbers. Obviously, we do have harvest numbers prior to 1994, but they're more sporadic and they're not really, of the same information that would go into them. So due to that needing to be a constant, they decided to go with 1994. And what was your second question?
Does the model consider the number of participants per year?
So when discussing landings, the model is really only looking at it as the number of crabs being harvested
Right.
from the fishery itself. Essentially, the crabs leaving if it was not natural mortality.
Right. And so wouldn't it be pertinent information for the model to know that it took twice the amount of crabbers to catch this many crabs? Or if there was, in this particular year, was half as many crabbers as there were 5 years previously? And so, because it's assuming that everything in participation is constant. And how is that not a huge concern in the scientific community to just put a number on landings and say this is what was landed overall, but it did put zero weight on the amount of participation it took to land that? It just doesn't make sense. None of the things make sense, and so when you give data to a model, wouldn't it be pertinent to sort of have that model understand that at 50% participation in any given year, or 37%, or any percentage based on year one, from year 1 to year 25, or however many, weight each amount of landings per participation level? And it would help the model understand that the amount of participation and gear in the water it took to catch this many crabs has some value, other than just it assuming that 3,000 crabbers from start to finish, from 94 to 23, and that's what it's sort of assuming, that some finite number of crabbers throughout the entire time series. And how that's not, to me, that's not justifiable. And so I think that's why you see a lot of, why it's called into question of where we're at with the stock assessment, is that it just doesn't contain enough data to give us a good depiction of what's really out there. And, I hate that we're so heavily dependent upon a stock assessment and a 2 and 10-year rebuilding plan when we don't even truly understand where the stock is at the moment. I know we have data trends, and I want to speak on that as well. This is not a dig at anybody that's conducting surveys, but when you show up into an area and you put your net in the water at whatever location, bad water could have showed up the night before. She could have showed up 2 or 3 days before. And so run everything off and you pull your net and you say, oh, we didn't catch no crabs right here. When in all reality, the crabs are shoved up into 6, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 foot of water. And everything from 10 foot down is either non-existent or dead or way up in the water column if you look at your bottom machine. And so, there's just so much inconsistency that can be argued here that it just makes me weary to accept the fact that the crab population is what you say it is. And so those are, these are some of the things as having, tons of hands-on out there with these animals. I just can't see where you're getting to this conclusion. We need to get to the public comment, and so I'm going to have to cut the discussion off, and we're going to have to come back to a little bit of discussion for a vote. So with that being said, and thank y'all for y'all's patience. First up, I've got Mr. Paul Beals. I'm gonna try not to limit you to the hard and fast 3 minutes, but we're T-minus 1 hour left in this building.
I'll be quick.
And so don't feel like you gotta be rushed, but just try to get your point across and we'll be glad to listen to you.
My name's Paul Beals. I'm from Columbia, and I thank the advisory committee for serving and for being here. I know you volunteers, and I appreciate that. I understand that the 2023 stock assessment is not being used for management. We understand that. The figures from that failed update made the models go haywire. Until we have an answer as to why, and until we have a new valid assessment, I respectfully ask the advisory committee to recommend no action on the blue crab. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beals. Next up, Mr. David Gallup.
My name is David Gallup. Tonight I have given you 2 pages if you happen to see them anywhere. I think in the bottom left corner it says 2024 Chesapeake Bay Blue Crab Advisory Report. You can't comprehend it all just looking, but one shows the spawning stock abundance, the other shows juvenile recruitment. One sentence that is underlined clearly states that even with the continued low recruitment, CBSAC remains concerned about the disconnect between female abundance and recruitment success in the Chesapeake Bay. If you look close at the graphs, what stands out, and it's crazy, but some of the highest recruitment years come off the lowest spawner years. It's kind of unexplainable, but that's 33 years of data from VIMS. And they know what they're doing. But that's what they're seeing, that there is no connection, maybe in 1 year or 2 years. And I know that what you're saying is that hopefully this is fixing recruitment by increasing spawner abundance out of the water. It's already a proven premise. It's not going to work. Second point. That management plan was written in 97 or 98. It was written by Lynn Henry. There's 2 or 3 of us in here who sat with him for hours. And I'm not knocking Lynn here, but it's way past time to rewrite the plan. Me and the division said for years, it should more closely resemble a shrimp management plan instead of a fishery management plan, which is what it's modeled after. There are a lot of reasons. One being, it's 2025 and you still can't age a crab. A crab is either mature or immature. You can't say this crab's 3, unless something's come up in the last year or so. You can't say a crab's 3 years or 4 years old. You can't say that your spawning stock is composed of 20% 2-year-olds, 70%. You can't do it. It's either mature or immature. If you continue to try to manage with the outdated plan, outdated data, with the current philosophy and proposed regulations, crabs are going to make you look really stupid. And I'm not dissing anybody here, but I will conclude with this. I cannot tell you, after 60 years of crabbing, how many times crabs have made me look like a bumbling idiot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallup. Perry Wood. Perry Wood Beasley, for anybody taking notes.
Thank y'all for coming. Keep it short. We've got to work together on this. We need more transparency. Y'all put observers on my boat, on our boats. We need to observe y'all. We need to work together on the science, the data, all this stuff coming up. What you're doing don't work. We tried to bring it up years. I was on where y'all at now a few years ago on the committee. If the money's not there, let's get legislation and put money up. We've got to start using peeler pots. We got to start using crab pots. The crab troll don't work. Little Lonnie Miller can set out his net beside me and wear me out. Now, I don't feel I'm the worst crab or the fisherman in the world, but I know people that can outfish me, outcrab me. And that's in any industry. If you're a painter, one painter can outpaint you, he can outpaint him. In the fishing business, one better than the other. But still, the weather, the factors, this lady up here has very good comments. Thank you for your word. Thank you, Mr. Blanton. We've got hurricanes, we've got runoff, we've got the snow, the freeze. Has anybody taken consideration any of that? Years prior, the freeze this year, what's it going to do next year? Well, we've got to go on, and we sell, and the fish houses are seeing 100% to 144% increase in total production in crabs. So there again, the woman's not pregnant, but in 9 months, she just had a baby. Where are those little crabs at? When we're peeling, we're shaking that peeler pot, little crabs are falling out that big. You're not catching those crabs in that net. When you pull in a trolling net, you've got to pull it fast enough. You got to have the right water temperature. It's got to go to the bottom, put more chain on it. Is it a crab net or is it a shrimp net? One or the other. You don't know what you're doing. I can put a net over in 3 minutes. I can't figure out which way to point the boat in 3 minutes. You cannot make a troll and make a multi-million-dollar industry change on a 3-minute troll with 2 people that went to college not knowing anything. We work our whole lives to understand what we're doing. And the more you go, the better you get. I welcome any of you at any time. And Kathy, you too, any of your people. I'll be glad to join you in the troll. Any way we can help you. Don't take it from us. This is a big industry. This is our last industry. Look in this room. How many young people you see in here? There's 2 young kids right here. When our age group peters out and dies off, it's pretty much over. Nobody's getting into it because, just as the lady said, nobody wants to get involved at a younger age because they don't think it's going to last. I was asked that 20 years ago. Do you think that fishery is going to last 10 more years? I said, yes, if you'll let it. But there's too many regulations in all fisheries. If the crab data is wrong, how about the flounders? How about the herons? How about the rock? All the data is wrong, people. Let us be the scientists. Work with us. State, give us some money. Put the government, let us be and observe you. You observe us, let us observe you. But thank you for your time. I'm gonna let some other people talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry Wood. Brian Overton, are you signed up to speak? Okay, because I skipped over you, but they got these little green stars up here and you didn't have one. Okay. Dana Beasley.
Hello, thanks for coming tonight and listening to what we have to say, if it matters. You're looking for a 2% reduction, 20% reduction. Last year alone, I had 31 lay days that I know of that I couldn't crab. On them 31 lay days. The one week I have out here, one day I sold for $863, minus gas, minus bait, minus your mate. I was left with $358, which that's a pretty good day. But if I'm only allowed to keep 10 bushels of she crabs, I had to throw over 18 bushels of she crabs, which is $360, which brings me down to a negative $1.10 for the day. if I could have went the other 3 days that week, I would end up having a $2,900 week, which is a pretty good week. But with your reduction, I'm at -$6 for the week. Nobody's going crabbing like that. You can't do it. You can't afford to go out and spin your wheels. Second of all, you presented tonight a 42-minute presentation. If I can ask, how long have you been working on the presentation and the science?
Just the presentation or the science?
I love it.
I mean, the science has been going on since 1994, since the
I
beginning.
mean, but this new presentation that we're dealing with, Adaptive Management 3.
For the adult.
I mean,
Just this, so we started and we presented to the MFC back in May of 2023.
okay. But tonight you give us 42 minutes to look at these charts and then roughly give us 3 minutes to take it in, try to figure out the math, and tell you what we think in 3 minutes. And you've been working on it for years. I think the guys here know a little bit more, like Perry said, about the crabbing. Where was that? Before you even start working on a plan to come up with reductions, I think there should be more input from the crabbers. Go to the crabbers or have meetings to come out and go, hey, here's what we kind of need to do. What do you think we could do? I've not been invited to one of those meetings. You know, when we get the agenda, it's already, here it is. You know, we don't have any input in that thing. You know, it's now, here's what we got, but now what would you like? It's a little bit late in the game. The economic side, it goes down to, like Mr. Blanton said, you got basket providers, you got bait people, you got fishing people, there's crab pot builders in here. I think I saw Mr. Mayo back there. There's thousands and thousands of people that get a slice of this pie off of crabbing, not just statewide, it's all up and down the East Coast. If we can't go crabbing and you hold a dealer's license, you lose your market share. Once that market share is gone, you're not getting it back. If you want a pizza and every time you go to the pizza shop, it's closed, you're going to a different pizza shop. It's open. When the guys from Maryland call, New York call, they want crabs. If they can't get them from here, they'll call Louisiana. They're going to call somewhere else and get the crabs because they got to have crabs. That's what they want. Second of all, I did a little math and it could be wrong. It's hard to read the graph. I don't have the exact numbers, but the landings in 96 were upwards of whatever you said, 68 million pounds, correct? There was roughly 108,000 trips, which boils down to 629 pounds a trip. Now we're 2020 and we're 14 million pounds, which comes down to about 466 pounds a trip. But if you take that 466 and you introduce another couple thousand crabbers and we bump it back up to 108,000 trips like 96, we'd be catching 50 million pounds of crabs. That math don't lie, it's right there. There's whole areas in Albemarle Sound, and all these guys know it. There's plenty of crabs out there at times. You can't fish. Sea turtle's gonna ruin you. You can't even go out there. They'll roll your pots, tear them up, and there's crabs out. You can set some pots out there and catch 25 crabs to the pot overnight. But the turtles get you and you gotta move and head somewhere else. And they keep pushing people farther and farther to places that in years before they didn't crab. They stayed closer to home, but you gotta run from them. I mean, I know they're federally protected, but they're an enemy to everybody in the fishing business. If they stay in the sea, they'd be great. Go look at them, take turtle tours. And the last thing I want to say is, and you mentioned the word a lot of times, but the only thing in any of this is quantifiable is the lack of money in my paycheck at the end of the year because of it. I'm going to probably lose what your recommendation is going to cost me between $8,000 and $10,000. And like he said, if you get some government subsidies to pay us not to crab, I'd be all for that. But that's my piece.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Ms. Bridges.
Thank y'all for coming. I appreciate it. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse over and over and over. The same stuff I preached at the last meeting. One thing you did tell me, Robert, when you'd come by and you'd measure crabs, is any time that you do a tweak on any species, it changes the whole economical system or ecosystem is what I'm trying to say. Now, if you do, that's a little tweak, you were saying a little tweak. Do you think this is a little tweak? Do you think that doing that much is going to change the whole environment, the whole ecosystem? What do you think? You think so? I do. And if I'm going to take that kind of reduction like everybody else in their income, why don't you take that kind of reduction in your income? It would really hurt you, wouldn't it? It would kill that mortgage payment, wouldn't it, every month? You got to think about other people and their livelihoods and their families. And like everybody else is talking about, because of all these restrictions and everything, do you see the younger generation come in here? Do you think I sent my daughter to college? Heck yeah, don't come in this business. It's a dying industry. They're trying to put us out of business. I'd rather spend money for her to go to college and learn something else, a different trade, anything. And that's a shame, a real shame when this is happening. And like another thing I'm gonna go on is about the trawls. You do the trawls part. Did you grow up in this industry? I grew up in the industry, and like I said at the other meeting, I drug a shrimp net for peelers before back in the 90s. But I don't think I could drag a net properly and do it the right way to get the right facts. And I believe you probably didn't grow up in this industry, or you. And how do you know? Do you think you could do it right? Have y'all thought about offering grants to get the crabbers, fishermen, or whoever to go out with you? And your nets, are they the proper nets? Are they float nets? Are they drag nets? I mean, you use same nets for shrimping. I mean, you got to realize that this is a livelihood for people. And let's see, I could just go on and on. And the other thing, and everybody else has spoken on, is the economical impact to your community. It's not just your community. It is all over the United States because these crabs go everywhere. And they trap, I ship in New York, I ship in Maryland, I ship in North Carolina. But it's going to impact the basket maker, the box maker, your crab pickers, your crab houses, your grocery stores. If it cuts my income down by 20% or 21, whatever you want to say, do you think I'm going to spend that much money at the grocery store? You got to cut back. Some of these communities are nothing but crabbing industries in there, Hyde, Terrell, Perquimans, Pastime, they depend on that livelihood. What do you think it's going to do to that community? It's going to devastate them. And you're going to see people moving out of that area to other areas. The same thing as you're going to see crabbers moving from the female crabs to target the male crabs because they've got to go where they can make money. They've set their lifestyle up according to their incomes. And when they can't make it on one species, they're going to target another one. And then that little tweak you're talking about is going to change the whole ecosystem. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. Mr. James Byrd.
Good evening. I didn't know I was walking into a filibuster this evening. We've got the people that do this for a living, and I'm not a commercial crabber. I don't pretend to be, but these men sitting behind me are. And if I wanted to figure out how to do it, I wouldn't go to college graduates that hadn't put the meals on their table, not doing it. I'd go to these guys right here, and I'd get their input first and foremost. The fact that we're sitting here discussing, I don't know how many times we can say it over and over again, flawed data, where we listen to a presentation for 70 minutes, you justify, and you've got some real gumption to still sit there and think that the table you're standing on or the seat you're standing on is valid with these models. I listened to it for 50 minutes and it would take me, I don't know, 2 hours to make you understand it. So I guess the old saying goes, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. Let's get to the roots of this all. Commercial fishing, blue crabbing, it's about harvesting public resource. It's an economic impact. And the decisions that this council is making, this advisory council is making, is getting it to hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. We're not just talking about a basket of crabs here. We're talking about a trucking industry, interstate commerce. We're talking about fish houses. So my ask is that this advisory council not make any changes to the current plan. We've got a current plan that's been going on for decades, and it's not working according to the model. But that's because this model has so many holes in it, we could stop crabbing altogether, and we're still going to see a population decline based on this model. Thank you for running the numbers. I didn't have the data ahead of time, but one of my first points here, when I was looking this over, was the reason behind using these double line graphs and why you're trying to be misleading. Why would you put on the same scale the pounds and the participants as a line graph rather than comparison and creating a proportion where it could be obvious to see that we're not seeing this decline. We're seeing a lack of participation because of the rules and measures by the Marine Fisheries Council as a whole to not encourage people to come into this career. How hard is it to get a commercial fishing license? We all know the answer. There's a lot of problems here, and I don't have the solutions. The only solution I have for now is to not further restrict a fishery that is thriving. And we can go back and just ask, generally speaking, these guys that have been doing it for 20, 30 years, are they seeing less crabs in the pot from year to year to year? Now, if this baseline of, I'm looking at millions, hundreds of millions of crabs. Now, if that were the case with this huge decline, I doubt we'd see people still paying their mortgages and buying their boats. So again, I ask for y'all to consider the common sense and not the flawed data. We can sit here with graphs my 3-year-old can draw and try not to make decisions on them. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. Gene Ashton.
Thank you all. Thank you all. My grandfather used to tell me it's us against them. And as you can see tonight, it's us against them. You can play it any way you want. You can do all the little pretty graphs you want to do. All you got to look at is the year 2023. The decline in egg-bearing females was going down, down, down. Where did the crabs come from in 2023 and 2024? You got an abundance up 40% from 2022 to 2023. How did they get here? Where did it come from? Can you tell us? No, I don't know. You can answer if you want. Where did they come from? Where did the landings increase 40% from 2022 to 2023? Why I doubt your mess is because we lived through all this crap. You know, we're going to have a sanctuary for the females. We're going to close all this bottom off. If you leave them alone, the six are going to come back so thick you won't even have a market for them. That didn't happen. Then let's throw away the big 6 3/4 inch females because everybody loves big crabs, big ones. They don't want this crap. He got thrown back. Lynn Henry started that crap. It's not gonna affect you. He caught a bushel of my crabs one day. They went 25% over 6 3/4. That's a pretty good effect. So we'll just can that idea. Now we'll throw away the small females. That's gonna save it. Where are we at now? The same damn place we were before. And you can't answer the question. Where did they come from? You don't know. My great-grandfather told me when I was a little kid, if anybody tells you they know what it is about a crab and what they're doing, they're a damn liar. And you're all a bunch of damn liars. And I hope you all go to hell for it. You put a lot of good people out of work. All of you. Put them out of work. Last night, your main word was concern. We're concerned about the species. We're concerned about this and that. Are you concerned about these people here? No, you're not. You don't give a shit. And it gets old. We come here and beg for a goddamn right to work. And what do you do?
Mr. Jean, keep it tight.
Shit on us.
I think the first name is Daryl Beasley.
Just one quick question for you guys. Hell, I'm almost 70 years old. I've been crabbing banks all my life. You're talking about those bushels, this for generalized. I don't make any sense about what you guys are saying, because you understand half of it. But is this for a pot limit bushel for crabs or just the female crabs?
So,
So I'll answer this real quick. So there's a suite of options and the papers and the documents have been put out. And the division's recommendation goes as far as female crabs, but there are additional options in the paper that cover all crabs and female crabs separately.
And I ask that is because I'm not as fast as I used to be when I was 20, 25 years old. I can't go ahead and crab 400 or 500 pounds anymore. Myself, I do it by myself. And I sell my crabs to a market now. And what I have to do is, all I do is I go crabbing every other day. I take my 6-inch jimmers out and I dump the rest of them in there and goes to the picking house. Now, am I gonna have to, if it comes down to that, am I gonna have to turn around and cull my she crabs out? That means I'll have to cull she crab number 2s and jimmers.
correct, if a sex-specific trip limit did go into place, you would have to cull the females away from the males regardless of the market category.
Well, I'm sure that's why this will give the job up now. I thank you for your time then.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley.
Thank you.
Vic Rollinson.
Hey, I'm Vic Allison from Lawn Cheese. And I got a little bone to pick about this shrimp net you pull. You cannot pull a shrimp net above 65-degree water temperature and catch crabs. There's not one crab or troll netter that will pull the crab to try to catch and make a living. When the water is 65 degrees, the crab outruns the net. So all your data on these small crabs is just bullcrap. Pure and simple bullcrap. It should not be used. It should never be used. It's just stupid. I know people have been told this. It's just stupid to use that. And the man right there just proved to you when your precipitation about declining, you're using the daggum declining, and they're declining because there's not enough of us no more. In 1996, there was crab that come down from Maryland to Chesapeake Bay. It come in Orton Inlet, it come in Hatteras Inlet, and it come in Ocracoke. Now I don't know if it's any further than that as far as ever crabbed. That's where all your she crabs come from in the Pamlico Sound. Where's the crabs that come out of Maryland that come down here? That crab does not come down here no more. New Jersey's catching that crab. Your bluefish, your rock, your flounders, the troll boats could not pull along this beach when we used to catch flounders because there were so many crabs. They catch 200 or 300 boxes of crabs in one tow. They're not here no more. They're going north. So the crabs we're catching, I don't care what you do, you can cut us out for 20 years and come back, and we're never going to be 1996 again. We're never going to reach that number again. Because that crab does not come down the ocean no more to us. Thank all of you. Thank all of you for being on the crab walk. Because Perry is a good friend, and he's been on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Mr. Wesley Peel. Pass. Jamie Parker Jr.
Most everything of mine was covered. I think Mr. Blanton had some really good glasses up there and he could see everything I had wrote on my piece of paper here. When you were giving your presentation, I wrote it all down. You said missing data, lack of data, no data, questionable data. And then you made the comment, we're not here to pick a number. You're doing it. All your data is incorrect. Everybody here has talked about it. The nets you're pulling, they don't catch crabs. You're not going to. So everything that we've sat here and watched was a waste of our time. Because the data that you're giving us is telling nothing of the true population of crabs. Every one of the people sitting in this room run a healthy fishery. What we're seeing is a healthy fishery. But what your numbers show is completely opposite. How does that work? The real numbers of what crabs we're catching, it's a whole different ballgame. You can count on your hand right now how many guys in here are under 40. Because of all the regulations that are getting put on this fishery, other fisheries, they won't do it anymore. Because of people that are telling us that we can't do it anymore. Not because the resource isn't there. The resource is plenty abundant, but we're being told we can't do it anymore. And it's not worth us doing. People are going to do other things. That's about all I've got. Thanks for your time. Thank you all for here for doing us and standing up for the fisheries.
Thank you. Thomas Newman. Pass. Luke Midget.
I think I signed up, but I'll say a couple things.
If it's fine, if you got something to say, let's hear it.
Okay. Well, I'm just looking at all the stuff that y'all been talking about, and we got, of course, the stats they're not right at all. Over the last couple of years, I know we packed 400,000 more pounds last year than we did year prior to, 300,000 pounds more from 2022 to 2023. Just looking at my boats today, if we'd adopted the 10 bushel limit, my boats average 50 to 70 bushels of female crabs today. So we'd have had to throw over, out of the 4 boats, we'd had to throw over 160 bushels today. Each boat had 1 bushel of male crabs. I don't think we can make it on that. Yeah, and I guess Vic, he was the one who was talking about it, but I trawl a lot, not trawl for crabs, but for shrimp. You can't, when water gets up, you cannot catch a hard crab. You got to use crab pots if you're going to use, sampling. I really didn't have a lot to say. I didn't even sign up, but. And how are we going to feed our families with 10 bushels of crabs? Nobody in here can do it. I mean, if you do the math on what you bait to go out, a lot of times we got to run 15, 20 miles sometimes just to get to our gear. Bait is expensive. And in the summer months, usually the price of crabs is down. You go catch 10 bushels of crabs and get, in the middle of summer, you might get $30, $40 for female crabs. You got $150, $200 worth of bait. I mean, you're just crabbing for nothing. We can't do it. I don't see where we need to change anything. There's loads of crabs right now, the most we've seen in a long time. And I know all your stats go up to 2022, is that correct? 2023? Okay. We definitely need to look at 2024. I know every month I have to submit all my landings to the state. I've got insane seafood, so we have to put, I don't know why we don't have the stats up for 2024. Why is that?
Currently, the numbers from 2024 are still preliminary. So
Preliminary?
once they are finalized, we will have those numbers up there.
Once they're finalized. Okay, but we gotta have them in monthly. But it's gonna take y'all 6 months to get them together?
So usually the year before is completed around May.
I don't understand, that's why I'm asking.
It does take time to verify and go through the data. Usually we have the finalized numbers by May
Okay.
for the last year.
Well, what I'm seeing in my fish house, the female crabs are very plentiful. And we don't need to make any kind of changes. That's my piece.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that is my list of people that would like to speak. However, if you've already spoken, most of the time, we kind of leave it at that. However, let these, there's two other hands that went up. Ms. Tara, come right on up, Ms. Tara Foreman. That's it for those taking notes.
Tim Foreman.
Right.
So first, I'd like to talk about the stock assessment fail. I talked to the scientist that failed the stock assessment. I asked him some questions and I said, do you think that the Division of Marine Fisheries should be using the 2008 stock assessment to make management decisions? And he said, no. I said, you want environmental factors, there's no research. Is that meaningful? The DMF states that on the North Carolina Fish Dealer Report that the blue crab is on the rebound based on 2024 harvest. Do you believe that they are? Yes, this was from the scientist. In 2018, the peer review approved the model for the next 5 years, but did not advocate that management decisions over that entire period be based on the research of 2018 model. Because of the short lifespan of blue crabs, as well as other biological and environmental influences, strongly recommended that the model be updated at least once within the approved management time period of 5 years. So the peer review said it should not be used now either. They also recommended investigating alternative model types. The fishing surveys that are used to get the blue crab population or the juvenile recruitment are from 1970 and 1989 surveys designed for fish. The blue crab is a bycatch. It is not effective. All other states have dedicated blue crab surveys, which the Division of Marine Fisheries admits it has needed for 23 years. Just because you are not funded does not mean you should pass regulations while knowing you do not have accurate survey methods to impose these regulations. And when you're talking about the catfish, in North Carolina, harvested 24 million channel cat and 15 million hard crabs in 2022 and 2023, which one of those years. But Maryland harvested 4.2 million channel cat and 16 million blue crabs. The blue channel crab in Maryland makes up 75% of the total biomass of fish, which is probably about accurate here, I would say. And studies shows that the blue catfish prey on 441 tons of blue crabs each year. And also Maryland raised, increased from 2013, 600,000 blue channel cat, and now they're catching 4 million, but they are not seeing an increase in their harvest either. And also, I've got the data for the blue crab harvest. So there was many lay days in 2024. The harvest numbers in 2024 for the Division of Marine Fisheries is 17 million, and it did not have handwritten trip tickets for the last 2 months of November and December. So just with the crab house, we would have come up another 850,000 pounds. So that would have put 18 million. So then when you figure out all the lay days, you had one gentleman say he had 43 lay days. There was lay days across the state, probably about 200 or 220 lay days. If you had averaged that numbers in, we would have probably had around 24 or 25 million pounds harvested in 2024. And given the fact that the crab is a biennial crop, if we didn't have any juvenile recruitment or spawning abundance, where did they come from? Where did they come from 2022 to 2024 if our data is showing that there is no juvenile recruitment and no spawning abundance? It's impossible. And I ask that y'all vote the same way as the northern and the southern committees, which is no regulation imposed at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Foreman. Had another gentleman in the back here. Just state your name for the committee.
I'm Jordan Sexton.
Jordan Sexton.
Yep. I just wanted to touch on what everybody's saying about new people getting in. I grew up on the water. My dad was a crapper, crapping my brother. Took 3 years off, went to work for the county. I quit the county, and I had a friend that works at DMF. When she found out I quit the county to crabbing, she said, "What the hell are you thinking?" And the reason she said that is because she knows people like you and people like you are trying to put us out of business. So that's why people aren't getting in.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, sir. Come on up, Richard. Richard Newman. Richard Newman for the crowd.
Hey, I'm Richard Newman. I'm keeping this real short. Mr. Wilson, when you were speaking, you touted the success of the dredge fishery or the dredge center in the Chesapeake Bay. It's done during the winter. Trawl survey is done June and September. That's the difference. I have heard, I've been to the Northern Advisory and this committee. Staff has asked each time, what are we willing to give up? Well, nothing. But I'm here to ask, what are y'all willing to give up to get us good science? Will you give up 20% of your paycheck? How about 20% of your paycheck to get us good science? If all y'all give up 20%, we have money in it. For good science. We have money to set up different programs. That's pretty all I have to say about this.
Thank you, Richard. We're getting pretty short here, but I want to make sure everybody gets what chance they want to speak. But I'm going to close the public comment here and come on, Mr. We get 30 seconds. Can you get it out in 30?
Everybody here said tonight how abundant the crabs are, and I think we've all seen in the last 2 to 3 years that we've been catching crabs. And if our job here is to give up something to get more crabs, all we're gonna do is get paid less for the crabs. If these guys fish, all it takes is 100 boxes of fish. What happens to the price? Goes to the bottom. The money crab, it's not about how many crabs you have, it's how many crabs and what they're worth. I mean, if everybody had a boatload of gold, gold wouldn't be $2,000 an ounce. It'd be 50 cents an ounce. Same with the crabs. If you want to go out there and scoop them up with a dip net, they're not worth anything. Let us go out there and catch our crabs, tap the brakes, do some more data, get some correct data, and let's just move slow. There's no sense of urgency from anybody in here, I don't think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all who spoke and came tonight. Since we have a quorum, we're due to take a vote on the adaptive management strategies that's been presented. I'm going to take a minute and talk about one thing here, just to the public. I do realize that the process of fisheries management in the state of North Carolina is fairly convoluted. Public and industry input and participation is key to informing the MFC and the division. I would have liked to have seen this gone differently into a scoping period before any options were developed. I would like to have seen small roundtable workshops from start to finish, from Currituck Sound right on to the South Carolina border. And I would like to have seen a more comprehensive attempt, if you would, to characterize this fishery and the various mechanics, parts and pieces that takes to function. I encourage y'all to hang in there. This still has possibly multiple meetings left before it's going to be decided which direction this could go. I'll be there every step of the way for you, and so are these other people. And I thank y'all for being here. To the committee, any more discussion? We're very short. We got about 15 minutes before we got to wrap this up.
I don't want to beat a dead horse. I know we got to be out of here by now, and I'd like to put a motion if there's no further discussion.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to have no new management options be implemented until we have a quantifiable indicator of the current adaptation in place. So pretty much status quo, no new adaptive management.
I'd like to second that motion on my previous comment.
So motion by Ms. Birch, second by Ms. Mustin.
I believe that North Carolina has failed the stock assessment, to my understanding from the committees that I've sat upon. I don't know why we're ignoring the North Carolina and South Carolina stock assessments that shows a whole population variation along the eastern seaboard of the blue crab as a whole. And that's why we look at the northern and the southern regional committees, as well as the North Carolina Shellfish and Crustacean Committee. And I don't know why this committee is not seeing that if the states above us and below us are producing crabs, why, or not producing based on the requirements or the holds, and the spawning is not representative of, protecting the females. I just don't believe that we can reduce an industry and hurt a commercial fishing industry and hurt an economy in the state of North Carolina for unsecure data. Inappropriate data, not even inappropriate, just like not real data, just kind of guesstimates in trends. Yeah, it's a trend, but if there's no conclusive evidence, then there's no answer to that hypothesis. And I feel like this is hurting our commercial industry. It's hurting our consumerism, our tourism. It's hurting everything about our coastal economy of North Carolina. And so that's it. That's all I had to say. I apologize.
Note taken. Any other commenters for discussion on the motion?
So so I might not understand the motion process and everything on this. If we motion this, does that do we not have anything else after that? Do we not vote on anything else if we pass this right here? Does that mean end?
That's not necessarily true. The committee will vote on this motion. This motion will be documented, and then the Marine Fisheries Commission will receive the Northern, Southern, and the Shellfish Crustacean Committee recommendations as part of their packet. And if I misspeak about any of this, please pick up. But it is at all possible that the Marine Fisheries Commission could send something back to the committees to look at further. So at this point, I don't have a valid answer for you, but I can tell you there is a possibility that this may return.
Okay, I got you. I appreciate it.
Good. Mr. Wilson.
My only comment is just, I wish, we're down to less than almost 10 minutes. I just wish we had more time to maybe discuss some other options. I think that's the point of these advisory committees, is to maybe, come up with some new ideas or other, options that could, still achieve the same goals without minimizing, or at least by minimizing negative impacts to the fishers. So I just wish we had some more time for that. That's my only comment.
The goals are unclear, sir.
You mind a little clarification? The goals are unclear.
Correct. The fisheries data is not substantial. It's a failed survey. How can you project a status quo or a lack of status quo or a surplus of status quo if you don't have valid data? So it has to stay as it is.
Okay, Mr. Service.
Yeah, science is full of uncertainty, and good scientists communicate uncertainty effectively. Bad scientists won't tell you about the uncertainty. I think these guys have done a good job of being very open about their data and their shortcomings in that data, and we should be grateful for that. We should welcome that. And I feel like this kind of setting might encourage these good scientists to do otherwise, and that concerns me. I can't feel more strongly about the importance of the participation of the fishery community in this process. The best comments, the comments that struck me most tonight were about participation and cooperation between the division and the fishermen in gathering data. Because the division does need to see how you fish. They do need to understand that. And I think they try to. I think they could probably do better. But I think also the fishing community needs to understand what they do. And I think it would be very effective to have some cooperative science going on between the two. It takes resources. And just like we're dealing with dwindling resources in the fisheries, these guys are dealing with dwindling resources in their funding. And we may not be able to do that. And it's unfortunate, because it would be nice if we had grants to bring you guys in and put you on boats with these guys and help them fish. You guys know how to fish. They're scientists. And putting the two together would be terrific. And it's done in the New England fishery. I just took a course up at MREP up in New England. They had a fabulous citizen science program with the fisheries folks up there. It's a terrific program, and I would love to see that here. And I appreciate those comments, because I hadn't really thought about that until I heard the comments tonight, and I just wanted to address that. Thank you.
I do, but you have to understand, these are people's livelihoods. It may be data to scientists, but it's the money that feeds their children and sends their kids to college. And thank you for your consideration.
I'd also just like to say one more thing. So Amendment 4 is coming up. They're getting ready to have scoping meetings to talk about this and to help. This is the time that you show up. Not now. I made the motion for a reason. But when that Amendment 4 scoping and you get all those emails asking for your input, take the time and do it so we don't end up back here. So they've got good science. They've got science that you can trust. I ask all the members to vote here, but also get our watermen to agree to come to that round table for this next scoping, and let's fix it. Everybody wants to go home.
All concerns been addressed. All comments been made. All right, call the question.
Ms. Birch, can I get you to just read the motion on there, just to make certain it's what you want it to say?
To recommend fisheries remain status quo regardless. That's just no new fisheries management. I don't know how to reword that. Just put to commission to enact no additional management. Help me with the word here.
So
Management.
you want the motion to read that you want this fishery to remain status quo, is that correct?
Yes, no new management issues, like none of their options. Got that written.
I have it written as no new management prior to Amendment 4. Are you okay with that?
Trying to fix it.
Is that appropriate? Is the motion appropriate for the intent of the motion maker? Just the way
I'll
it reads.
second it
Just
because
look,
it's
just
correct.
looking at the way it reads is,
Fix my words, man.
I'm just making sure here.
I think you all understand what I'm trying
I,
to.
I believe I know the intent of the motion. It's very confusing when I read it.
I would recommend probably removing the adaptive management part.
Right.
The status quo would mean there would be no adaptive
Right.
management.
Thank you for your help.
Get rid of. Yeah, yeah, let's not get rid of, let's get rid of everything after Amendment 3. Okay. Now, does this motion read like you intended it to?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion by Ms. Birch, second by Ms. Mustin, and I'm gonna call it a question. Jesse, if you would, roll call vote.
Birch,
Aye.
Hammond, Hardison, Marshall,
Aye.
Morris, Mustin,
Aye.
Shepherd, Willis, Wilson, Service,
Abstain.
and Chairman Blanton.
I'm gonna abstain as well. The motion passes 4-0 to 3. And we had one little thing, issues from AC members, but we are 3 minutes out from the building closing. So if no one has any pertinent or pressing issues, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Hardison, second by Mr. Service. And all in favor? There you go.
Aye.
Say something about
Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like sitting here. I know that. It's so weird being.
That's too many people looking at it and stuff.
Well, just to like, trying to do it this way and I like sitting up there with them better. It's way better.
If y'all would keep